Welcome back to The Explainer. Look, when people talk about the Book of Job, popular culture has kind of flattened it, hasn't it? It's usually pitched as this neat, tidy fable about a patient sufferer who just sits there quietly while his entire life completely falls apart. But today, we're diving straight into the actual source material. And what we're going to find is a raw, messy, and deeply relational reality that's hidden right there in the pages.
We absolutely have to start with the big one. It's a provocative question that literally every human being wrestles with at some point. Why do bad things happen to good people? When tragedy strikes, we desperately want a math equation to make sense of it all, right? We want to believe that if we do good things happen. And if we do bad things, well, bad things happen. But as we're about to see, the Book of Job completely shatters that comfortable little equation. Okay, let's map this out real quick so we don't get lost in the academic weeds. We're going to cover, first, the question of theodicy. Second, the adversary's cosmic challenge. Third, Job's brutally honest grief. Fourth, the very real danger of pontificating. And finally, the true meaning of restoration.
Let's jump into Section 1, the question of theodicy.
So we have to tackle this heavy piece of academic jargon right out of the gate because it gets thrown around a lot with this text. The word is theodicy. Coming from the Greek, it basically means trying to justify God. It's a defense of God's goodness and absolute power in a world where terrible evil and suffering clearly exist. Now, a lot of people just assume this ancient book is a theodicy, meant to carefully justify God's actions. But actually, that is a total misconception.
Old Testament scholar Derek Kidner absolutely hits the nail on the head here, and it illustrates our first big twist. As Kidner puts it, if we try to write a theodicy, we're essentially arrogating to ourselves the right to justify God, meaning we are elevating our own human mental abilities above the divine. We're basically deifying ourselves. Job isn't an arrogant attempt to intellectually defend God's resume. It's actually a story of a spiritual pilgrimage. It's about a guy being set free from the prison of his own imagined rights.
Which brings us to Section 2, the adversary's cosmic challenge.
Moving on to the cosmic stage here, we really need to understand the heavenly dynamic that kicks all of this suffering into motion. Chapters 1 and 2 give us this backstage narrative framework that Job himself literally never gets to see. And right before the test begins, the text explicitly lists these 4 core traits. He was blameless, upright, feared God, and shunned evil. The guy was a genuinely godly intercessor. He even offered sacrifices for his kids just in case they slipped up. The text goes totally out of its way to establish, without a doubt, that Job's suffering is absolutely not a punishment for bad behavior. And here is the kicker. God is actually the one who initiates this whole costly test. He points Job out to the adversary like, "Hey, have you considered my servant Job?" The adversary is super cynical about it, claiming Job only loves God because God pays him off with blessings. Kidner points out something profound here. God doesn't just crush the adversary's argument with a divine veto. Instead, he allows the adversary to strike so that evil can be overcome in fair combat. It is this massive, severe, cosmic test of whether humanity can love God simply for who he is and not just for the perks.
Moving right along to Section 3, Job's brutally honest grief.
So, the cosmic test is on, and Job loses everything. I mean, wealth, children, health, the whole shebang. But far from being quietly patient about it, Job holds what we call a maximalist view of God's sovereignty. He literally tells his wife, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" But as the days drag into weeks, Job pours out this brutally honest, deeply angry grief. He cries out that God is tearing at him, treating him like an enemy target. But here's the absolute secret of the book. Even in his furious vexation, Job fights tooth and nail to maintain a raw relationship with his Creator. He doesn't just walk away. He brings his agonizing frustration directly to the only one who's truly in charge. That takes us to Section 4, the danger of pontificating.
Enter Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Honestly, these guys win the award for the worst comforters in human history. They bring us to a massive warning about human pride. See, the friends actually have correct orthodox theology about cosmic justice. They know God is just, but they fatally misapply it because they decide to pontificate. They arrogantly take it upon themselves to speak for God in this rigid, dogmatic way. Their logic is basically, suffering only comes to terrible sinners, Job is suffering terribly, therefore Job must be hiding some horrific secret sin.
It is wild to watch how fast this escalates into a total disaster. Cycle 1, they actually start off great. They just sit in gentle silence with him for 7 days. But then, they just can't help themselves. Eliphaz claims some scary spirit gave him a secret word. By cycle 2, they're preaching about the horrifying fate of sinners, heavily implying it's about Job. And by cycle 3, they completely lose the plot. They abandoned all comfort and outright falsely accused Job of abusing the poor and committing terrible social sins. They literally cared more about protecting their tidy theological system than comforting their broken friend.
And finally, Section 5, the true meaning of restoration.
We finally hit the climax of the book in chapters 38 through 42. God himself enters the whirlwind to settle this cosmic debate. And when God answers, there is this massive, incredibly important translation detail. God rebukes the friends. The best translation of the Hebrew reveals God saying, "You have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has." The friends just sat there preaching and pontificating about God. They never once prayed. But Job, even in his despair, he acted as a true intercessor. He maintained that raw relationship and spoke directly to him.
Then, God pays Job double restitution. Now hold up, this is absolutely crucial. This isn't just God handing him a transactional reward like, hey, thanks for being a good sport. Not at all. In ancient Torah law, paying double restitution was legally required when something had been stolen. So by doing this, God is definitively signaling that the severe cosmic test is over, the legal ledger is officially settled.
Looking closely at the source texts, early translations like the ancient Greek Septuagint and the Aramaic Asser texts totally nailed this. They were essential in preserving this detail, correctly translating that the friends failed to speak unto or to God. It perfectly captures the core message of the entire book. God values the necessity of relational honesty way more than mere theological correctness. Job had no idea why he was suffering, but he knew exactly who to take his complaints to.
So this all leaves us with a pretty intense final thought to chew on. The book of Job totally strips away our easy answers and our safe, self-protective theology. The question is, when you face unimaginable trials, or when you're sitting next to someone who is, are you going to retreat into the safety of rigid pontificating and dogma? Or are you going to have the courage to engage in an honest, messy, and deeply real relationship with the divine? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.